Hello everyone. Good evening from India. My name is Akhil and I'll be your co-host for the today's session. So before I move ahead, can you guys let me on the chat if I'm audible? Yes. Okay, great. And I hope my screen is also visible. So first of all, I would like to thank you all for joining this session, especially on a weekend. So today we are starting with the live session on Block CMS CRUD with React by Miss Aarthi. So, about Miss Aarthi, she is a programmer, educator, entrepreneur, and an innovator. She started coding back in seventh grade when she was introduced to basics. Since then, she made it a point to learn every programming language she finds interesting. So, today she possesses over 10 years of extensive experience in programming and development. And she has developed and deployed 7 web applications in the past few years, which attracts more than thousands of users on a daily basis. So, and currently, Aarti is working with the student base of more than 70,000 students all over the world. So, guys, she will be the trainer for the today's session, and I hope you guys enjoy the session and make the most out of it. Apart from that, so I would like to inform you that the all the contents which our trainer will be using, for example, code files or PPT, and the recording of the session will be available on your Eduonix dashboard in next 48 hours after the session. And also, guys, we are live on a YouTube channel where we have couple of few joinees joining in from YouTube as well. And while we wait for like a minute or so for few more joins to join in, so I want to inform you that in this session, we are coming up with cool and exciting offers at the end. So make sure that you attend this session and stick till the end of the session to avail the exciting offers. And also, we'll be having a dedicated Q&A session at the end, so you guys can park your questions in the chat box, and that trainer would try to address it as much as possible. So without taking much time, I would hand over the session to Miss Aarthi. So Aarthi, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Akhil. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Yeah.
Okay.
So welcome Aarthi for
Thank
to this wonderful session.
thank you.
And yeah, most welcome. And I'll just stop my screen share and
Okay.
mute myself, and you can take it.
I'll take over.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Hi everyone. This is Aarthi. I'll be sharing my screen now. Just a second. All right. So I probably won't be able to see all of your chats because there are a lot of people in here, but I'll try to answer the chats as much as I can. Okay, so I think the prerequisite I've set for this particular session is that you need to know JavaScript, right? So you probably don't know React. Am I right? So I'm going to be trying to cover as much React as possible through a project. So this project as such, it's going to be um, a, a little much for someone who doesn't know React. So I really recommend that you, sorry. Yeah, some might be okay, some might know React, but most of you probably don't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from scratch and teach you as much as I can while building a project to the best of our ability. So I might not be able to finish the project completely, but I think I can get you to a stage where you can finish it yourself, something like that. Okay, so if you have any doubts, I really you can post them on the chat if you'd like, but I'd recommend that you wait for a bit until the Q&A session, and so I can actually see the chats, because while I'm teaching I probably won't be able to. So that's it, let's get started. So that was the introduction, and it's going to be a block CMS CRUD with React, and most of this is just going to be project based. So I'm just going to show you the code screen, and I really hope you have some editor installed. I have Visual Studio Code installed in my system already, and I've created a project to start with because creating a React project actually takes a little bit of time. Just a second. 1 second. Let me see how, yeah. So I've created a project to start with. But that said, I'll teach you how to do that as well. So as you probably know already, since you know JavaScript, so React is a framework that makes development easier for you, faster for you, and it's modularized. There's a lot of packages that come with it. So a lot of things that are difficult in JavaScript, it's much easier in React. And to start with, if you have Visual Studio Code or an editor, follow along with me and go ahead and create a folder in one of your folders. So I've called mine blog project 1 like this. Okay. And once you've done that, does everyone know what node and npm is? If not, it's a node package manager which can be used to install the packages that we need, and React is one such package. So we are going to use npm and the node modules to install all the packages that we need to create our project in here, because our project is going to contain a lot of things that automates a lot of things in here. So to install React, follow the this is the following command. So npx create React app, and then space, and then the name of the app that you need. I've named mine blog project 1. So the naming convention is pretty much the same as you use for any other project. So don't give space in here, and make sure that there aren't a lot of special characters, things like that. And then press enter, and it should take you a bit of time, but if your system is fast, your project should be created fast. And after that, you can open the folder. The folder, in my case, it was blog project 1, right? So go to file and open folder, and open the folder. And once you've done that, terminal, new terminal, okay, which would open up, let me close this, okay, which would open up the terminal like this, because this terminal, we need the terminal in here. That's why I've used Visual Studio Code, because because otherwise we'll have to open up the command prompt. My voice isn't audible. Oh, can you guys hear me? Okay. So far this was the setup. Okay, so this was a setup. Is it? Yeah. Is everything clear so far? I'll send you the I'll send you the source code later. Okay, so I might go a little fast because we have less than an hour to finish the entire thing. So, yep. All right, so this is how you create your project. And once you create the project, you can use npm start to open it up. Okay, so this is the command you use to open up the project, and you should get something like this to start with. This is the default project view. All right, I'm going to share it now. Okay, so this is the default project view that you probably get immediately after you open it up, and we are going to edit this. All right. And the modules and everything, I won't be going into this in detail, but a lot of these things are pre-installed. So the public folder, this is the folder from which you get the view that I just showed you. So the index.html, where your app view is going to be. So if you look here, so see this div element, right? So this div element is the root element. Inside of this root element, all of the components and all of the files and folders, everything that we've created, we are going to create in our React app. It's going to be rendered or basically pasted. It's going to be converted into your HTML and JavaScript and everything, and it's going to be pasted in here basically. So this is your root. If you worked with JavaScript, then this is something like the app or something like that, the main div element, right? And you have some files. We probably would be deleting most of these files. And then you have the package.json. This keeps track of all of the packages that we've installed, and it depends on we might be installing more packages. For example, we'll install a package called Axios for fetching data and everything. So every time you install a new package, you'll get that listed in here. So you can just go to the dependencies and you can list that. You can see the list and the scripts. If you notice, we just used npm start, right? So npm start basically is a shorthand for React's script start. So you can create scripts like this in here to make things easier for you. So there's a build as well. We won't be looking at build, but this can be used for deployment, right? And the package lock, it's just an extended version of package.json. So you can just go through that if you need. And then you have your source folder. The source folder is where all of the React stuff is going to be. So this is the folder that we'll be working on. So you can just ignore the rest of it because we won't be looking at them at all. For example, the node modules, you don't really need to look at them at all. So in the source folder, the default source folder, it comes with your app.js file, and this app.js is going to render the entire thing. That is, you will be creating a lot of components. Components are basically parts of your website or parts of your app, and we're going to put it all together inside of this main root app component. Okay, just like in your public index.html, we had this root, right? So similarly, as far as your React is concerned, this app.js is the root. It's going to be the place where everything comes together to create the entire website. And then finally, that is going to be rendered in your index.js, okay, which renders, remember, if you know JavaScript, right? So this is your document.get element by ID. So we are going to get the div element that we created before, and then we are going to render the app. Remember the app I just told you about? So import that, and we are going to render that here. So whatever is inside of this gets pasted into this in layman's term. Okay. That's as simple as that. And a lot of things, we're going to just delete them. So for example, report web vitals, we don't really need that. So I'm just going to remove that completely. And index.css, let it be. And in your app.js, I'm going to remove the logo because I don't want it. And also I'm going to completely, I think I'm going to remove the header completely. Okay. And to start with, let's just have a h1 that says hi, so we know that it's working. And we can delete the logo and delete the report web and the setup test, because we won't be creating unit tests for now. All right, so that's it. Now let's look at the output. Okay, so we just have this. So it's working. So that's it. So now let me explain the project a little bit. So the entire project, to start with, I would like to teach a couple of things in this project. Now, so I want to teach you how to do HTTP requests, and we'll be looking at get requests and post requests, because once you look at get and post, then the update and delete requests, you can do it yourself. So I'll be covering get and post, update and delete. It's easy. So we'll be using Axios for this. Of course, you can use Fetch API if you know JavaScript. Then Fetch API, you can probably go with Fetch API, but Axios it just makes fetching easy. I mean, all these requests easy. So we'll be installing that package for HTTP, and I'll teach you routing as well. So these are advanced topics in React. So from the start, I want to talk about what components are, how to get data, how to print data, and how to style the components and all of those things. But that aside, I also want to teach you how to do HTTP, I mean, how to perform HTTP requests and routing mainly in React via this project. Okay. All right. So since HTTP requests are a very important part of this particular project, and I'd like the freedom of creating my own, creating my own data and manipulating the data. And since you guys don't know backend, and right now we don't have the time to cover backend as well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for a mock server. Okay, so there is this mock server out there. Let me share the screen again. Okay, so you can just type a code JSON server, and you have this GitHub link in here. So this can be used for any project actually. So if you're into front end, and if you don't want to get into backend at all or something like that, or you don't have the time to set up a backend, you can just set up a mock server like this, and you can set up a mock database, and it makes API testing very easy, right? So instead of testing with a fake API where you probably only have the freedom to test get request, get is when you get the data. And if you want to create new data in your database, or if you want to update existing data, or if you want to delete existing data and all of those things, most of the fake APIs online, they don't let you do that. So instead, you can set up a mock server yourself without knowing backend, and you can use this to create a dummy database like this, for example. So this would be a database where post is one of the tables, and this is one of the first data or entry of that table, where each of these are fields, right? So this is shown in JSON format. I hope you know what JSON is. So it's a data format. It's one of the data formats out there. So, and this comments would be the next table like that. Okay, in our example, we're just going to create one such table, so to speak, just post, because we don't really need the rest. Just go ahead and read this and read their documentation, and it's very clear, so you'll know how to install it, how to use the server and everything. No, we won't be using Redux in this project. As it is, it's going to be very jam-packed. So, all right. So first of all, you'll have to install. So get this. And now we already have the front end running, right? So generally, when you have an entire project, generally, right, most projects, they have a front end as well as a back end, right? So front end will have it'll have a server running, which is what's happening here. So when I pressed npm start, I opened up the server, and it's running in localhost 3000 like this, right? But but most of the time, your front end and back end, they have to be running at the same time, because they have to communicate. So right now we don't have a backend setup, so you can open up a new terminal in Visual Studio Code by pressing the plus button right here, and you'll get the new terminal, and you can install JSON server. So I'm not going to be installing it because I already have it installed. And if you use -g like this, it'll get installed globally in your system. So go ahead and install JSON server. And once you've installed it, go to your source code again. Let me see which one I haven't. Okay. And it's always good practice to have an assets for all of your images, and in our case for the database file and everything. Okay, so create an asset inside of your source, and this is for creating a folder, this is for creating a file. And then db.json, you can name it anything you want, but when you watch it, make sure that you use the exact name that you use right here. Okay, so db.json, I've created a database, so to speak, and I'm going to be creating it in the JSON format. And I'm going to populate this right now. So let me just get my data 1 second. Okay, I'll just open the, I'll just create it. I'm gonna take it from the one I have. One second, guys. Okay, all right. So there you go. So what I've done is, it's a very simple data. Okay, so post is going to be the name of our data. So the URL, when you try to access it, you're going to access it by /post like this. And inside of this, we have an array of objects, array of JSON objects, basically, and each of the entry is going to be one such object or one such entry. And each of the entry has a title, body, and an ID. But every time you create a new post, the ID is going to be automatically generated. So the only things that you need to provide are going to be the title and body. So we have two such posts right now, and now we're going to try to access it. All right, so what I'm going to do is, let's go back, let's come back to the PowerShell, and in here, let's go to the source and assets. Okay, so you have to be in that particular folder to access this database, otherwise you'll get an error. And you can start a server. So just like we started a server for our front end, we can start one for the back end as well. Now it's quite a big line of code, but if you'd like, you can go to package.json, and just like they've done in here, you can create your own script for this as well. But I'm not going to do that right now, but that's completely up to you. So JSON server, watch, the name of the file, db.json. And unfortunately, if you look at the documentation, you'll notice that JSON server also runs on port 3000. And if you notice, our front end is also running on port 3000, right? So we have to change the port, or there might be a problem. So you'll have to change the port, and I'm going to make it 3004. You can make it anything you want. All right, so see, it's working now, and we can it's listening right now or watching right now, and you can see everything in this particular port. And if you open it up, let me show you just a second. See, if you open it up, you'll get all of the endpoints. These are basically called endpoints as far as API are concerned. So every slash, every piece of data is an endpoint, and in our example we just have one piece of data, it's just one endpoint. And if you press this, see, in localhost 3000/post, you'll get your entire thing. And this URL is going to be very important, because we're going to use this URL to get data from this, and we're going to use it to post new data to this, and so on and so forth. Okay, so far I hope okay, so far I hope I'm not going too fast. I'm trying not to go too fast. Okay, I'll pause for like 2 minutes or so you can catch up with me. Okay, so this is the entire setup process. The setup is done. So we've set up the front end, we've set up the back end, and we have our output so far. Now, next, let's look at creating components and all of those things. Okay, so creating components and making them, displaying them in your app, and so on and so forth. So just like with your source, generally a website, when you create a website, you'll have multiple components. You'll probably have a component for just the header, one for the footer. If it's a one page or a single page application, which is what React is mainly used for. So every part of your application would be a component. So in our case as well, we do have a bunch of things. Like, for example, we have a component for showing all of the posts. And we'll have a component for creating new posts, which would be the form in which you'll have to enter the title and blog and body of the new post, and so on and so forth. Okay, so generally it's recommended to create a new folder for your components so everything is properly modularized, and I'm going to do the same. And to start with, we're going to have an all post component. Always make sure that your components start with a capital letter. Okay, and then we're also going to have a create component, and all your components have to end with a .js like this. Okay, so once you create the components, you can import it inside of your app, and you can look at the output. I mean, you can have them literally rendered. It's called rendered in React, which means that whatever is inside of your component is rendered in the root, which is your app. Okay, so now that we've created the component, everything, let me explain how React as such works. And I'm going to, for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to explain states and outputting data and all of those things. Okay, so this is the structure of a normal React component. Okay, so you can import things. As you can see here, we imported our app.css file. If you go in here, which we will be using mostly for all of our stylings. Okay, so it's just a normal CSS file, and we've imported that right here. And this is how you can import. And then just like you have in JavaScript, you have a function, but the difference in here is that this is going to be this is a React function, okay? And hence it'll be treated as such. So, and the main use of React is that you can use HTML inside of your JavaScript, as you can see here. Okay, so in your return statement, you can have data in here. For example, in here, you can create your data, you can create your functions and all of those things. You can get some outputs and everything, and you can render all of that directly inside of your HTML like this, right? So this is just basic HTML. And let me show you one second. Okay, and inside of here, you can just render it. So instead of actually creating HTML file like we did with JavaScript, and then using a document.getElement by ID or by class name or tag or whatever it is, and that's a lot of lines of code, and after that rendering using inner HTML, and there's a lot of things like that, right? So instead of doing all of that, you can just have HTML directly inside of your JavaScript component, and you can get the data and put it in here. Now putting it, I'll teach you how to do that. So as I said, you can get the data, right? So getting data is quite easy. So there is const and everything. So I really hope you know ES6, so const, let, and all of those things. Now, unlike the usual way of doing things in React, I'm actually using React hooks instead of the actual way of doing things. So in React, you have React hooks, and you can create data like this. So the name of the data and the method that you can use to basically set the data. Okay, so, and these are called states. So states will hold the data that you can later access inside of your HTML like this. And then there is something called, and of course, the minute you start using these things, you need to import more, import React, and there's also something called useState, which is a React hook. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go deep into this, but understand that useState is going to be used to access and manipulate or set, delete, and do all of those things to your data, to your piece of data. So data in this case, in our example, is similar to one of the variables you create in JavaScript. But unlike in JavaScript, we can just do an equal to and set the new data, right? But in React, you can't do that. So in React, you'll have to create a method like this, set up a method like this, which can be used to manipulate this value. And while you create it, you can have a default value in here as well. So I can call this default. Okay, this can be anything. This can be a string, number, any of array, any of those things, or it can be null or nothing as well. So this is how you create data inside of React. Now we're doing things like this because React is reactive, as the name implies, meaning that every time there is a change in something. So you know how Facebook works, right? In Facebook, when someone posts a new post or someone posts a new comment or every single like, everything is immediately updated all over the world, right? You don't have to refresh, you don't have to do anything. There's not even a single second of delay, and that's because Facebook is running on React. Okay, so since that's because they don't use normal variables, everything is states. So that's why you need to create states, create your data, or create your information inside of states instead of your normal variables, so that everything can be reactive and everything gets updated immediately. Okay, so once done, you can access that inside of your HTML like this. So this is your component. Okay, this is the actual component. So every component should have a return like this, and inside of that you have your HTML. And in the HTML, you can have IDs, classes, and everything. And one more thing, a difference between HTML and this is called JSX. Okay, it's called JSX, not exact HTML. It's a combination of HTML and JavaScript. Now, instead of class, you'll have to place it as class name. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. But it still works as a class. So you can still access it inside of your app.css as it is. But while naming it, while creating the class name, call it like this. Okay. So, and inside of the return, you will have to have a root element like this. So just like you have in any other page, you have a root element. Inside of that, you'll have multiple elements, right? So always create a root, mostly root div element. And inside of that, you can create multiple elements, HTML elements. And before we just had a hi, which was directly rendered. That's fine. But if you want your data to be rendered, then what you need to do is you need to place it inside of curly braces like this, and then the name of the state, which is data. Right now it has the value default in here. Make sense? Oh, sorry. Use state. Okay. I think yeah. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a minute again. Okay, I'm going to pause for one more minute so you can just take a look at all of these things, because state is a very important part of it. Our entire project is going to be on. If you don't understand states, then it's going to be very difficult. All right, now let's look at the output. See, the default. So instead of having something, literally hard coded into your HTML, we have our variable, and it's dynamic now, right? So you can change the value of state now. You can do any of those things, and it'll automatically be reflected inside of here. Or you can have an input box, and you can enter something, and you can every time you press enter or every time you change the value, that would be reflected inside of here, and a lot of other things. So unfortunately, we don't have the time to look at all of those things. But while we look at the project, I think you'll come across most of these concepts. So don't worry about that. Okay. So that's for your that's the basics of states. So now that's done, I'd like to go back to our project. And let's start creating it, okay? So it follows the same methodology as this. So import whatever you need and then create a function. It can either be a normal function, or you can create you can use an arrow function for this as well. Okay, these are components, functional components. And then always make sure that you export all of the components that you create, because every time you create a component, it's going to be used by something else. Otherwise, it's not going to be rendered at all. Okay, so make sure that you export it later on, okay, at the end. All right, so now let's just copy this and paste it right here. And I'm just going to edit it a little bit. Of course, I'll need to edit the name and all of those things. And the name of the component, name of the functional component you create, and the name of the file should be the same. So I'm going to use arrow functions for this. So all posts is equal to like this. Okay. And for our example, we need use state as well as use effect, and use effect and also fragment. I'll explain what that is later on. Just make note of these things right now. Okay, now use effect is similar to use state. Now, use state basically lets you use state, right? Like access state, and you can set the state and things like that, right? So use effect is now these components, right? So every time these components are rendered or basically shown on the screen, you can have something happen. So with use effect, for our example, what I'm going to code is I'm going to say every time the all post component is shown on the screen or first rendered on the screen, I want to get the data from this db.json. So the first time it's rendered, immediately after it's rendered, get the data. So creating something like that in JavaScript is very hard, but in React with just one line of code, you can do something like that. So when it's first rendered, immediately you need to do the fetch. So there's no delay, it happens fast, and it actually your current data is properly shown. Okay. So for this, we need a couple of things. I need first the data that we're going to get from our database. So I'm going to create a data state, and also I'm going to create a loading state to keep track of the data getting loaded, and so I can show a loading message when things get started. And once I get the data, once I know that I've gotten the data, I can erase the message and then I can show the data. So this way there's no error. This way the screen is not blank. Okay, so first I'm going to create a data. And I told you, right, you can have anything inside of here. And if you notice, this is actually an array. So to start with, I'm going to have an empty array in here, which is going to be filled with whatever is inside of db.json once I finish with the fetch. And then I need a loading, which is basically the state, the loading state. So it'll start off being false, or I think it'll start off being true. And then once it's loaded, it'll be false. So I can keep track of what's happening with my fetch. And okay, all right, it's going to be false because right now it's not loading. And later on, once I start the fetch, it'll be true. And once the fetch is done, it'll be false. So then I can display the data. So there's no delay. Okay. And remember, I told you, just like you can create data, you can do methods as well. And all of that has to be before your return, because once you have to consolidate all of those things and show the output in your HTML, or sorry, in your JSX. It's called JSX. And the use effect, just like you state, your use effect is also a method, a function. And it's a function call, basically, which means that you're giving a function call to your browser, letting it know that immediately after this gets rendered, please do the following and following. Okay, so inside of the function call, we'll have an anonymous function. I hope you know what that is. It's JavaScript. Okay, so you'll have an anonymous function that lets your browser know what needs to happen when, in our case, when the component gets rendered. Now, use effect can be used for other states as well. It can be used for every single update. For example, we'll be creating new post, right? So every time a new post is created, I can set this component up in such a way that it's immediately updated. Just like it happens with Facebook, right? So every time someone posts a new comment or every time there's a new like, it's immediately updated. That component gets immediately updated. So I can set it up like that as well. So if I just leave it as it is, then that's what's going to happen. But in our example, we don't really need that. So what I'm going to do is right after the anonymous function, I'm going to say this so that, this basically means that only on the first render. So first time I load the page or the component, I want whatever is inside of this to happen. Okay. And in here, we are going to have our get methods. So before we start with that, we need Axios. So I'm going to go ahead and download that. So we have a client running here. We have a server running here. So open a new one and install Axios. npm install Axios. See, if you don't want to use Axios, you can just go ahead and use fetch as well. So JavaScript's fetch API is perfectly good. The only thing is that you're going to have to write a couple more lines of code. So you can use that as well. So while this gets installed, yeah, it's create React. You don't really need the -g actually. Okay, I'm going to go back. All right, so Axios has been installed. I'll explain the states and effect one more time while I use it, so don't worry about that. And immediately after I've installed, I'm gonna import it because I'll be using that for like this. Okay, so import your Axios into it so we can use it later on. Now, I told you what the use effect does, right? So it's on render or on every update. And in our case, we've set it up with this condition, which means it's on the first render. Let me just like this. Okay, and in here, I'm going to have the fetch code. I'm going to use Axios for that. Let me close this. Okay. And maybe make this a little bigger so you can see it properly. I hope you can see it properly. All right. So, I hope you know the fetch code. I won't be going into this in detail. I'm not using promises for this. I'll only be using set timeout. So I don't want to confuse you too much because I don't know how much of JavaScript you guys know. So just a quick refresher. Get is used to get the data. Okay, the post request is used to create new data. So basically in our example, getting the data will get these first two posts, and post will add a new post. So we'll add a new post with new title, body, and the ID would be 3. Okay, and then you have update. As the name implies, it'll update current data. So post and update are pretty much the same. So once you learn post, you can easily do update as well. And delete would delete one of the data. Now delete is very easy actually. You just send the ID of the post. For example, if I want the second post deleted, then I'll just send 2 and it'll get deleted from the database and it'll get deleted from my output as well. Okay. Now in this particular component, in all posts, we just want to get data, right? So as I said before, I'm going to be using set timeout because generally, when you get your data, depending on how fast or slow your system is, it is going to take some time. It's going to take at least a couple of milliseconds at least. So it's always better to wait for it. Generally, we'll use promises. There is your async, await, and a lot of those things. So you can look that up if you'd like. That in this example, I want to make it very simple. So I'm just going to use set timeout, and it's not the right way to do this, but it works. And I'm going to set it to just 100 milliseconds or so. It can be much lesser as well, depending on your system. I think I can go less. So inside of this set timeout, I'm just asking my system to wait for a bit. Okay, so I'm asking it to wait for 100 seconds. So give my get request 100 milliseconds or so to get it. And then Axios dot get. Now this is the command. And inside of your get, you need to send the URL that you need to access. So if you look at your terminal, they'd have given you the URL for your access, right? If you see, this is your request URL. It's called as the request URL, which means that it's going to send a request to this particular URL, which is going to have this data right here. Okay. So get a request, and the get command, as such, as I told you, it's for getting the data. So you can send this request to all of the data, which is what we've done, all of the post, or you can narrow it down to one of the posts. So that's why you always make sure that your posts have ID or something that differentiates each of the posts, or something that differentiates each of your data. Because if you would like to access one of those, then you need to have these things. Okay, so in our case, we're going to access all of them because we're going to get them all and then display them as we need. Okay, and once you've gotten the data, then you'd have gotten a response from your fetch, right? So we've done a fetch and you would have gotten a response by now. Now get that response. It's an anonymous function, and you can do a couple of things. Now this is where our set comes in. Okay, remember I told you that in React, since it's reactive, you can't just say, generally what we would have done is we would have just said let data is equal to maybe something like this, and then we would have just gotten it, and maybe with a for loop or a map or something like that, we would have gotten the data like this. But doing that is not reactive. So if there's a change, it's not going to affect, and it's this as such is not going to work well with React. So instead, we have our use state, and we have set data. So to set this data, you need your set data. It's a method, it's a function, and just call it. And while calling it, you'll have to send the data that you want to set. So right now it's an empty array. So then what you're going to say is the result.data. See, if you do a console.log of result, you'll notice that it has a lot of information, and one of them is the data property, and the data property has the actual data that we retrieved from here. So that's why I've directly given res.data in here. Okay. And that's it. Okay. So get, and then from the response, get the data and set our data state to that particular data. You can make this something else. You can name this post or something else so you don't get confused. Okay. And in your, if you know fetch API, you know that you can keep tagging along a lot of things, right? So there's a lot of then, and then you can have a catch in case there's an error. So in case there's an error, okay, I'm going to get the error, and I'm just going to log the error, or instead you can have a message or something and you can print that out in your React in this as well. That's up to you. Okay, so this is very simple. So this is all it is. Okay, we're getting it, and then we are setting the data, and then we're catching errors if there's any. Okay, and now I'm going to add the loading data to this as well. So remember I told you that when I get started, I want to set loading to true. Okay, because I'll be using this inside of here to conditionally render the data conditionally render the elements in here. Okay, so that's why I'm setting the loading state. So immediately after it gets started, so I know that it's going to get started. So I've set loading as true. And once I've gotten the data, I can make loading false again. And that's it. Okay. So that's it for our use effect. Okay, I'll just take all of these and remove this. Paste this here so it's not. Okay, so that's it for our use effect. Now we just have to render everything. Okay. Now for rendering, what I'm going to do is, I told you before, right? You need to have a root component in React. So one component that's going to have all of the component. Now you don't really need that to be a div element. So there's something called fragment, which can be used in case you don't want an actual element. So we can have something like this as well. Okay, and inside of this, I'll have a h1 that says all posts. And now I'm going to conditionally render this. Now to start with, remember loading is a state, right? So if I just have loading in here like this inside of my flower brackets, I'll just get either true or false depending on what I've set it up to be. Okay, but I don't want that. I want to print something. So I want to say if loading is true, okay, which means that it's started getting it, then I want a paragraph tag that basically says loading with this message that says this message. You can make this h2 tag or something, maybe make it a h3 so it's a little visible. Okay, you can do that as well. Okay, so this is the first condition that I'm setting. So when it's true, when loading is true, then I want a h3 tag that says loading to be displayed in my screen and nothing else to be displayed. Now, when loading is false, which means that it's done, right? The fetch has been done. And you don't have to worry about the first state of this because we are using use effect in here, which means that immediately after it gets rendered, I'm going to get started with my get request. So most probably immediately after your page gets loaded, your loading is going to get set as true. So this condition will only be true when the fetch is actually done. Okay. So now when loading is false, which is what we've set in here, which means that the data has been received. Okay, so in that case, you can set loading, you can make set loading false in here as well if you'd like. And then you can have a message set up as well. Okay, if that's the case, tag along an and within brackets, we're going to create our data. I hope you know the map method of JavaScript. So most of this is just JavaScript. Yeah, you can use that as well. Yeah. So most of this is just advanced JavaScript actually. So the fetch and see then catch and all of those things. So if you don't know any of those, it's going to be a little difficult. Okay, I'm going to make so these are all of the posts. Okay, I'm going to make the class as posts. And inside of here, I hope you know the map method, right? So map method basically maps all of the data, all of your array data. And the data in here is going to have the array, this particular array, right? So data.map. And every time for every single, or instead you can use a for loop, but map is much more sophisticated. So for every single mapping, for every single iteration, basically, you have D in here, which is going to have one of those entries, and you can access it. And in our case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to retrieve the title and the body alone, and the title is going to go to D.title. And since it's a variable, since it's basically a state, you need to put this inside of flower brackets like this. Okay, so it can be rendered in your HTML. And in your paragraph, I'm going to, you can do it like this, but I'll tell you why that's not the right way to do about in just a minute. Okay, I think I made a mistake in here because I'm getting an error. What went wrong? Sorry, there has to be, yeah, there has to be a parent element, a root element. Okay. So for every post, I'm going to create another div. Sorry, I'm going to name it, class is going to be post like this. And it's going to have a title and paragraph in here. Now, if you look at the output right now, I think, okay, you'll have to export the exact same name in here. I just copied it, right? So if you look at the output right now, you'll notice that it would not work, actually. And that's because we aren't rendering it properly in your app. Remember, this is just a component. This component, it has to be rendered inside of your app.js, which in turn is rendered inside of your index.js, which in turn uses your index.html. So it goes on like that. So you have to get it into your app.js. So go back to app.js and we can remove everything that we have in here. Okay. And in your return statement right here, okay, before you do that, of course, you'll have to import it. So every time you use a new component, you'll have to import that inside of your parent component, basically. So import, it's from the components folder and it's called all posts. And rendering a new component inside of a parent component is very easy. So once you've imported it like this, you can just copy this and paste it right here and access it as a empty tag. So what I'm telling here is that I want this rendered right here. Okay, sorry. I want the entire component that's inside of my all post to be rendered in this particular position in my app, in my entire website, actually, because app is the root component. Okay, now if you look at the output, one second. I have an error. Right, sorry. If you look at the output right now, you do get the loading message, but we don't get the output. I think that's because of the stylings. We haven't set the stylings yet. So I'll just copy and paste the styles from my previous folder. And let's look at the output again. All post .css. I think we have two classes, right? We have one called post and one called just post. I'll just quickly explain it. So in app.css, since we've already set up these to with their own class names, right? We have post and then we have post. Now post is for the entire all the post, and this is for each of the post. So I want a grid-like system, so I'm going to set it up like that. So in app.css, just come below here and pasted this. So it's just basic CSS, actually. So we have a background color. I don't think we have a background color. Anyway, I think the background color it gets yeah, because I think index.css, it has its own background color and everything. So there's a cascading effect, I think. I don't know. So there's a display grid. I hope you know grid. Basically, we're creating a 2-column grid where each column is going to be one of our blog posts, and we are going to create a gap between that, and we're aligning all of the items to the center, and then we have basic border radius and everything, and we're going to create links out of this. So we made the text for the links black, and then the text decoration as none. And okay, what went wrong? Okay, that's working. One second. My data is not being set properly. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. I found. Yeah, a map is not returning properly. Thank you. I didn't know why I missed that. I think it should work now. Yeah. Okay, so see, there was a brief loading and then you have your data. Now, why don't we create a snippet out of this? So where's it? Yeah. So remember I told you that you can create functions. So far we've created states, which is we've created components, we've styled the components, we've created states, we've learned how to access those states, that is how to modify those states. And we've learned about the use effect hook and the use state hook. So use effect hook is the lifecycle hook. So if you know any other frameworks, so this is basically a lifecycle hook. Okay, and we've learned rendering, we've learned conditional rendering, and we've also learned list rendering. Basically, rendering is a very important thing, because if you have most of the apps, you have a bunch of data and you need to render it, right? So we've learned all of those. Finally, we'll learn how to create methods. Okay, so in our output in here, we're getting the entire body, right? So instead of that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a snippet of it, and I'm going to return that. So to do that, I'm going to create a get snippet method. It's going to receive the body like this. Okay, and now, since this is just a normal function, we can create a normal variable like this. We don't really need a state, because this state is not going to be rendered as such. Okay, we're going to return something and that's going to be rendered, right? Okay, so and here we're going to return snippet is equal to body dot slice. So basically just the first 200 characters of the entire data. Okay, I'm going to get that, return that, and from here, just like we use the flower brackets to access our data, we can use it to call data as well and send arguments and all of those things. Everything works the same. So in here, what I'm going to do is, what was it called? It was called get snippet, right? And data, was it? Okay, d.body, sorry. Like this. Okay. Now, if you look at the output, where was it? Yep. See, only the first two. I mean, only the first 200 characters. And as we start adding a new blog post, then we'll start getting more. Since we've created a grid that, if you look at the app.css, since we created a grid that basically has no limit on the number of rows, we can add any number of blog posts as we need. Okay, I think it's already 8:30, so I'll just quickly go through creating a new blog post. Okay. While we do that, we need roots as well. So routing in, unfortunately, React does not come with its own routing system like the other frameworks do. So what you need to do is you need to install a separate package for that. So there's something called React Router DOM. So npm install React Router DOM like this, and you have to install that to get your router working. So while this gets installed, why don't I go and set it up? Okay, so you'll have to set up your router. I don't have the time to explain all the history behind routing and everything in here. So I'm just going to show you what I'm going to do. So we're going to be using browser router. There's also history, but I'm going to be using browser router and from React like this router DOM. Okay, and what? There was warning. I think it's working. Yeah. Okay, and right, instead of the strict mode, I'm going to replace that with browser router. So I'm just telling my system that I'll be using routing in here. Okay, so I'm enveloping the app with router so I can use routes in here. So now let me explain what routing is. So this might be a new concept because generally, right, in JavaScript, in HTML and everything, we just use links and there's a href tag and all of those things, and we just move between different pages using that, right? But frameworks, they aren't set up like that. Frameworks were set up for single page applications with multiple components inside of that. So on the other hand, but your users, they aren't used to single page applications. Now single page applications, generally how they work is you'll have your components. You have a navigation, let's say like this, and you have a home page, blog and everything. So every time you click on one of those things, that component is going to be rendered in below, right below. You click on another, the second component is going to be rendered, but nothing is going to change in your URL. Okay, so that's a single page component, a single page application, but your user is probably not used to that. They would need to bookmark, they would need to remember the URLs, they need the original setup, right? So in order, so because of that, we need the routing setup. So one of the reasons why it's not built into React is because React was not created to create multiple page applications, multi-page applications. But since we need that, we can install a an external package like this, and we can simulate routing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a navigation and a bunch of links. So go back to app.js in here, and we have all post installed already, imported already, right? So similarly, let's also import create. So I just need two links in here. So I need one on clicking on it, all the posts will be shown, and create that on clicking on it, the create link, the create, sorry, the create form would be shown. Okay, and also from React router DOM, you need the link and route, because the link is similar to the a link that we have in HTML, right? And route is for creating the routes. Now, all of this, it might seem unnecessary because we don't have that, but this is for single page application. We are trying to create a multi-page application out of that. That's why. So now what I'm going to do is, instead of directly rendering my all post like I've been doing so far, I'm going to create links out of this. I'm going to create a navigation, and I'm going to call this, okay, always make sure that in React, your class is not mentioned as class, but as class name. I'm going to call mine nav, and I'm going to have a bunch of ULs with LIs. Okay, now it's going to be all posts, and it's also going to be create post like this. Okay, but this as such is not going to work. Okay, we need a link around this. Generally, we would create a link, but in our case, we can use a link. Now, this link should point to something, right? This link should point to something, and on clicking this link, I need to load the all post component. On clicking this link, I need to load the create component, right? So for that, I need to use the root tag to set up the roots. Okay, so first root is going to be the default root or the home root, okay, that most websites have, and it's going to load the all post component inside of it. So every time this root is accessed, this component is going to get loaded. And similarly, let me just copy this. If the person tries to access the create root, then the create component gets loaded. Okay, so to make that happen, I need to link to it. So just like you have a href, you have link to in here, and you need to specify the link that you just created inside of this, and take this and put it right here. And similarly, sorry about that, link to is equal to create. Take this, put it right here. Okay, now if you I think we've set it up. Okay, the only thing we've left in here is the styling, because it's gonna look very ugly right now. So let me go back to my CSS. Let me just copy and paste it because we don't have time. It's a very simple navigation code, actually, just very simple. You can just look at this and you'll understand. So I'll just show this. So later on, when you look at the recording, you can just copy it. Okay, so basic, floating all of these to the left and making this block. Okay, right. So now if you look at the output, yep, we have our all post, which is the default. So every time you click on it, you have your all post, and then when you click on create post, you have nothing right now, and that's because we haven't created it. And of course, you can go deep into this. You can make sure that your navigation stays the same. You can probably create a component out of it, a navigation component out of it, and you can have multiple routings. Okay, so all of that, I'll leave that to you. Okay, so this is very basic. Okay, so now that we've created routing, that's the second part done. And finally, let's create a new component. Create new post. So for that, okay, we don't really have time, so I'm just going to copy and paste the code I already have, because we've gone beyond the time that we were supposed to have. Okay, it's actually not very hard to understand, since I've taught you pretty much everything that you know that you need to understand about components and set state and everything. I can just quickly go through this. Now, remember I told you that for creating new things, okay, you need a post. So instead of axios.get, you have axios.post. And for post, you have to send a request to the entire table. Okay, so it has to be a generic request. You can't make it like this. Okay, you can't send it to one single entry. It won't work, because you're just creating a new entry at the end of the current table. Okay, so what I've done in here is I've created new states for title, body, and I've created a message, which is just a message that prints out once my new post has been created, or if there is an error, in case, the user tries to submit without entering a title or a body. In that case, all of those things, there's going to be a message. Okay, so these are our normal states. Okay, and before we look at all of these methods, okay, this is not going to have a lifecycle hook, because in this case, what I want done is I want to create a form. Okay, so I have a title in here and I have a form. I have a form. And these are normal. You have your generic labels, and then you have an input, and then another label for the post content, and then you have a text area, and then finally you have a submit button. Okay. And now the thing here is, again, why don't I paste the message below? Why should it be inside the form? Let's make it below. Okay. And the thing here is that the only difference here is that my title and body, they are at the start, there'll be nothing, right? So only difference here is that the value should be set to the title that is the state, and in here to the body. And you have a handler in here, an on change in here, just like we have on click and everything in HTML, right? Similarly, you have an on change in here, and every time there's a change to this, that is basically every time we type something into this, I want to handle it in one of the methods. I'm calling a method. I'm calling the handle title change method, and in here I'm calling the handle body change method. Both of these are going to do the same thing. And in these methods, I'm you know this, right? So this is the event variable, which is going to have a lot of properties, and it has the target property and the value property, which is, in our case for this, it's the input. The target is the input box, and you're getting the value inside of that input box. So in most form submissions, even in JavaScript, you must have come across this to get the value, right? So we're just setting the title with the current value, setting the body with the current value. So every time there's a change in either the input box or the text area, we are setting the title. And finally, once, see, there is an on submit handler in here, which is going to call the handle submit method, and that is going to call my fetch. It's going to call the post method in here. Okay. So to start with, we are going to prevent a default, which means whenever we press the submit button in any form, it refreshes, right? So we don't want that happening, because in that case, the message would not be displayed. We won't know what's happening. So we have the the events prevent default to make sure that even after submit, we stay on the same page. And then there's a condition in here, so we check for the title and body. So unless and until both the title and body have been filled, you can set this condition up to anything. You can have a text limit, minimum text limit, and things like that if you'd like. Okay, so I'll leave that up to you. So if it's been filled, then call the post method. And as I told you before, the URL you're sending, it has to be the base URL. I mean, just the endpoint, and not, it shouldn't go deeper than that. Now, the difference between your get and your post and even your update later on is that you have to you have to send a body. So right after you send the URL, a comma, and then you have an object in here, which is going to have everything that your data is going to expect. Now, it's not going to expect ID because it's going to be generated automatically, but title and body you need to send, and it has to be sent in the same format. So case sensitive, it's case sensitive, and you need both of these. Okay, so if you don't send one of these, then you're going to get an error. It won't be created properly. Okay, so where was I? All right, so you'll have to send both. And since in our example, we already have a title and body from our form, I can just send that. And of course, again, if you notice, only when I try to use my data inside of my HTML, that is JSX, I have to use it within flower brackets. But in here, where but inside of methods and everything, outside of JSX, I can just directly use it. So I just give title, I'll just give body, and that's that. Okay, so after that is the same. So once you've gotten it, we don't really need the response because we're not getting any data from here. So we aren't actually using the response. So we're just setting the message. So every time if it was successful, then we'll set the message to say post created successfully. If there is an error, we'll say there was an error, try again. And that's it. And finally, set the title and body back to nothing. So your form goes back to an empty form. Okay. And then there's an else, meaning if any of these weren't filled and they try to submit, then you have a message that says, please enter the title and body and submit again. Maybe, okay, I'll make it submit again like this. Okay, that's it. And after our form right here, we have the message. We are rendering the message. So whatever the message is, there are 3 different possibilities. It's going to get rendered. I hope that makes sense. And let's look at the output now. Okay, so all post. Oh, okay. I think I haven't. Okay, 1 second. I haven't designed it yet, right? Oh, yeah. Sorry. That was it. This is also a normal, very normal design. Okay, I'll just go from the top to bottom again. So like this. So we have designs for the label, for the input, for the submit button, and for the text area. Now, if you look at the output, okay, so there is a routing problem in here. It routes everything. We'll get to that later. Now, once again, I'll just open this up. I'll just share my original so I can show you the rest of it that I need as well. Okay, so in here, 1 second, 1 second. I'm just opening it up here fast so you can just see the output right here. Yeah, okay. Okay. Now, if I try to enter the title and okay, I need the body, let me just copy and paste the body. Ah, yeah, exact. Sorry. Okay, where is the body? Okay, so we have post created successfully. And if you look at the output right now, I mean, not the output, if you look at the database right now, so you'll have the third. And yeah, like the other person mentioned, I forgot to add exact in here. So where was it? 1 second. While you create your, sorry, while you create your route for this one, right? Make sure that you mention exact because see, otherwise it's a matching thing, right? So it matches, and the problem with your route, I mean the home link is that it can match with all of the other ones as well. So that's why you're getting the rest of it as well. So if you do it like this, if you just leave it without an exact, then for every other component, this will also get matched. So you'll get both the all post as well as this. Okay, we don't need that. So let's do an exact like this. Okay. And similarly, okay, now that I'm in this particular folder, I'll just go ahead and just show you the rest, show you the other thing that I wanted to show you. I think I hope you're clear with create and showing all the posts. Now, the only other thing, we don't really have time for the rest of it. So the only other thing I've prepared in here is that every time you click on a new post, you can go to one of those posts. So just like, so for that as well, you need your browser router, your link, your root. Okay. And I've created a new component called post. And I've imported that because I'm going to be creating a route in here. So just like I created a route before, I think for this as well, if I make it, let me make it exact. So just like I had a route created in app.js, I'm creating a route in all posts. So every time a person clicks on one of the posts, right inside of my post, right inside of every iteration, I'm creating a new link that's going to go to that particular ID. Okay, so I'm actually creating that link. If you notice it's inside of the flower brackets because I'm using the ID and I'm creating the new link like this. And this is called dynamic routing. So if you place it with a colon, and this can be named anything, I'm just naming it ID. So if you place it with a colon like this, that means that this particular value can be changed, which is what we are doing. So for every single render, we are sending that particular ID. Okay, so we are setting it up in such a way that that can happen. Okay, so router, make sure that it's inside of the router. The entire thing is inside of the router, and then create the route. Right after you've printed this out, create the route, and then wrap your data inside of link and create the actual link. Create the actual URL path like this. Okay, so once you do that, what happens is every time you press on one of the blog posts, it's going to take the ID, it's going to generate a new path URL, and it's going to go to your post component. And in your post component, you can actually get whatever you sent in here. So in here, remember, right after post, which is static, we have a dynamic aspect in it in here, which is the ID. And this is the dynamic aspect, right? So we can actually retrieve this and we can do something with it. If you guess by now, what we can do here is we can retrieve this ID and we can go ahead and do another fetch with that particular ID. Now, the only difference is that instead of just sending the entire URL, you can add the ID for this like this. You can add the ID like this. That's how you would do it to just get that particular item. And instead of mapping it, you can just directly print it out like this. Okay, so it's very easy. Okay, what did I do? Sorry. Okay. Now in post, so from here we are sending our parameter like this by using the colon. And in the component where you retrieve the parameter, you can use the use params hook. It's a latest React hook. So you can use the use params hook of React router DOM. Make sure that you import it. You need Axios later on because you'll be using use effect to get it. Okay. So use params, and we are destructuring our ID. So we're just getting that ID alone, and then later on you can use it to do a fetch. So here you do a fetch in use effect, and then here you print it out directly because you don't need mapping and anything for here, right? So it's the exact same process. So if you look at the output, so I press on this. I don't know if you can see it. Anyway, so it's coming up down here. There's a, yeah, I understand that there are a lot of info, but I hope that you can, just go through the video a couple of times. That's why I didn't go go into detail into all of the topics. Okay, but I wanted to cover a project to an extent. So that's it. That's it for this particular class. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I'd like to tell a couple of things before I end the class. We did actually use prompts and fetch in here. We used Axios. Fetch, I mean, promise. It's quite simple. Okay, one second. Instead of using set timeout, you'll just have to use async and await. Where was it? So here we are wrapping everything inside of set timeout, right? So instead of that, you can just use async and you can use an await in here. So it's like that, simple as that. Yeah. Okay. Okay, 1 second. Let me just go through the slides first, and then we can have a quick Q&A session. All right, so I hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed the course. I understand that it was a little overwhelming. I tried not to be, but I wanted to show you React, okay, and what's possible with React. So if you watch the videos a couple of times, I'm sure you'll understand it. I haven't covered React completely, but okay, so this is actually a part of the live online training on MERN Stack, the e-degree that we'll be taking up later on. So this was so it's going to be a global instructor-led 22-day live session. There's going to be 40+ hours of training, and there's going to be only 50 seats. So please take it up. And it's self-paced, and just like we had today, it's going to be interactive, but there's going to be more time. So it's going to be the pace is going to be much better in your live training than it was today. And it's going to go deeper. It's going to go much deeper into everything, and we're going to start from scratch, and we're going to, as I said, the pace is going to be slow, but we're going to learn a lot more. Like this project it's not exactly real world. Okay, so we are going to look at actual real world project. We're going to mimic actual real world applications, create them, and the live Q&A sessions are going to be much longer. So instead of 5 or 10 minutes at the end, it's going to be at least like 30 minutes, where there's going to be a lot of back and forth, where we discuss, and you can ask questions throughout the class as well. So it's going to be each session is going to be longer, and it's going to cover a part. Okay, instead of a lot of things at once, it's going to cover parts, so we can have a lot of back and forth and learn as we go properly. And after the class, you're also going to have mentorship and career guidance. There's going to be people who are going to help you out with your projects, and if you have any errors and things like that, they'll help you out. So we will be giving projects during class as well, right? So during those and if you have problems with the projects, if you get any errors, if you have doubts, you can, even after the class is over, before the next class, and even after the entire course is over, you can ask for doubts from the mentors, and they'll help you out. And each of these projects are portfolio oriented projects. So you can add it to your portfolio. You can use it to get jobs. You can use it to get freelance projects, all of those things. Okay, as I can't stress this enough. There's going to be real time interaction, and it's going to be and it's not going to stop at the class. Okay, even after the class, you can get any help that you need. So there's going to be 24/7 assistance. And there's also going to be help with interview preparation as well. And finally, after each class, you're going to have interactive quizzes and multiple choice questions and everything. And you're going to have an industry verified certification as well. And it's not just going to be for React, it's going to be for the entire stack. So it's going to cover everything from MongoDB, Express, React, Node, everything. And so instead of using fake servers like we've been using so far in this particular class, we'll be creating proper applications that can be immediately deployed to the web. So these are the topics we'll be covering. So we'll start off from scratch with HTML and CSS, and then JavaScript, and then React. Then we'll move on to React hooks, which is the latest form of React. And then we'll cover React Router and Material UI in detail. So you don't really have to fumble with CSS anymore. So you can create perfect looking applications. And then, as someone asked, Redux, right, for state management, we'll be covering that as well. And so that will cover front-end app development. So once that's done, we'll be looking at projects that is for front-end development. And then we'll move on to the backend. We'll look at Node.js, Express.js, and then we'll look at APIs, REST APIs, just like we saw today, but in much detail, and with a proper setup where the front end and the back end is properly set up instead of fake server. And we'll also have database set up with MongoDB. And once all of this has been covered, we can combine the stack to create MERN applications. So we'll be creating applications, we'll look at deploying them, and we'll also look at Mongoose, Heroku for deployment, Robo 3T, and a lot of other things as well. So it's going to be a jam-packed live training, and we're going to look at a lot of projects as well. So there's going to be an Instagram double click action project, there's going to be a reminder application. So these are real world projects that you can actually deploy on the web. You can create similar projects like this. You can and you can showcase them to your clients to get projects, or showcase them in your interviews. Okay, so these are proper projects. So there's also going to be a COVID vaccine slot booking system. There's going to be a counter application, file readers, CRUD application, a proper full-blown CRUD application. Okay, front and back. And then database schema, we'll be looking at reading data from Excel files, book collection, and a lot of other things. Okay, and also, if you'd like, we have an exclusive offer for just the students in this particular class. So there's a build-in Instagram and FB Messenger clone with React class going on. It's going to be another webinar, and it's going to be for just $17, and the offer is just valid for 24 hours. So you'll be creating both of these full-blown projects, okay, front and back. So if you'd like, please take it up. And that said, if you have any more questions, please ask. I'll answer them right now. I think someone asked about two-way data binding, right? Yeah. Oh, sorry, one more thing. I missed one more thing. So again, if you want to take up the entire e-degree, you have a huge discount for that as well. It's just $115 from the original price of $150. You can use this code websmern. And again, this is also only available for 24 hours. And if you choose this, you'll also have a 2-day certification workshop for the one that I showed you before, the two projects that I showed you before. Okay, so I'll have this open. In the meantime, I'll explain. Okay, Axios just makes things easier. That's it. Okay, so you can use Fetch API. There's no, I mean, if you're very comfortable with Fetch API, then go ahead and use it. Okay. Axios just, there's just one line of code, right? So that's why. Use state and use effect. So use state is for your states. States, like the variables we have in JavaScript, right? Similar to those variables, we have states in React. So creating the states and managing the states is done in use state. Use effect is for how and when things happen. So you can set up your code in such a way that when a component gets rendered, when a component gets updated, and those things do certain things. So that's for use effect. Now, two-way data binding, actually, we did do two-way data binding, but you probably didn't uh, notice. So if you remember, we had the value, right? Value is equal to so on and so. So that was two-way data binding, actually. Redux and Facebook clone. I think so. I'll ask the guys 1 second. Okay, so that said, let me just show you how you can complete this project later on. Okay, for the Facebook clone, we'll be only looking for the front end. Okay, not the entire thing. Just the front end with React for Facebook and Instagram. Okay, just like we did today. And yeah, so to continue on with this, if you'd like to continue on with this, I told you, right? You can use the use effect and you can print this out. And later on in here, you can have buttons. You can have an update button or a delete button. And on clicking that button, you can update or you can again send parameters just like we did before. And you can update or delete. So for update, it'll be the same setup, just like this. And your two-way data binding would be something this is two-way data binding. So value is equal to title, and then you updating it in here. That's two-way data binding. Then what you would do is just send a put request. Okay. So update is put, right? So instead of, I think in create, we had a post, right? So instead of post, you'll have a put request. And in your put request, you can't send it directly for everything. You'll have to send it for the particular thing. So you'll have to get the URL, get the ID from the link. Okay. And then you have to send a separate request to this. And then you'll have to send a body for its body as well for your put request. And delete requests are very simple. So you can have a delete button as well and get the ID and no body at all. Just remove this entire thing and it's just one. Just the URL with the actual ID of the post. Okay, so that's delete. Now let me just get this back. So put and delete are very easy. Okay, so that's it for this class. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you would like to get the discounts, then please go ahead. We've sent you the link. Okay, so the live training, the live webinar for $17, and then there is the entire entire workshop, 22-day workshop for $115. So huge discounts. So take it up. Thank you. I think I'm gonna close this session. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, guys. I hope you try it out. Yeah, I think you'll get a recording of the session, right? Akil, they'll get a recording, right?
Yes, Aarthi. So
Yeah.
recording will be available on their dashboard in next
Ah,
5 minutes.
okay. So I think in next 24 hours, right? 24 hours. I think in a few hours or so. I think tomorrow you'll get a recording of the session. So don't worry about that.